Thank you, Tracy. And I'm not going to take too much time in introducing Bob. I consider Bob a friend and always a friendly face and with a word of advice wherever I go. I think I sort of follow him around a little bit, from politics to Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, with him and Mel Cap really teaching our next generation, Bob. And Bob, of course, he really does, when people say people need no introduction, Bob is the epitome of that. And I wish Arlene was here. I almost was going to ask her if she'd be willing to interview Bob on behalf of our program committee and Rotary. Bob, I'm going to talk about mention your podcast. I didn't know about it until this meeting, so I can't wait for us to learn a little bit more about you. But I guess you have to put that on hold now that you're going to the UN. Bob wears more hats than anyone that I know. Bob, of course, as an Order of Canada recipient and Order of Ontario recipient, and many other accolades in between. He's an author. I have 2 of his books, and his most recent book is Political Stripes, which I would suggest folks run out and get. Bob is a lawyer, he's a professor, he was our former premier, as you all know, former leader of the official opposition. He's a father and a husband, very devoted to his family, and many people don't know that Bob is also a classical pianist. The last time I asked a favor of Bob was to play at the Kensington Market Jazz Festival. He was our opening act, and he was wonderful. You remember that Bob, with Molly just standing by you as you sort of tickled the ivories. And so I'm just so very, very grateful, Bob, that you are here to speak with us as Rotarians. Our committee was very excited when you said yes, and certainly Rotarians and others who heard about you coming said yes, so we want to be there, we want to be on the call, and we want to hear from Bob. I don't think there's anyone that I could think of that would do a greater job at this day, at this time, at the UN, when we need real leadership and someone to represent Canada and help the UN work through the challenges that it faces. So my fellow Rotarians, please welcome the Honorable Bob Rae to speak with you. Thank you, Bob.
Well, thank you so much, Marva. Thank you, Tracy, for that very kind introduction. I hesitate to tell this joke, but I can't resist it because it relates to the dream. When Arlene and I were standing waiting to welcome Prince Charles and Princess Diana to Ontario at a special hangar in the Ottawa airport, I turned to her and I said, Arlene, did you ever in your wildest dreams think that we'd be standing here waiting to welcome Charles and Diana? And there was a pause, and she looked at me, she says, Bob, I hate to tell you this, but you're not always in my wildest dreams. So I thought I would share that with you. It may be politically inappropriate, but who cares?
Well, now you can tell her that you were in a Rotarian's dream about a fire.
Exactly. At a campfire, very, very safe and sound. I'm really pleased to be able to meet with you, and I am a great admirer of Rotary, and I really believe very strongly in what Rotary stands for, what Rotary has been doing. How it's been working and operating, and I am very, very honored to have a chance to speak to all of you. I've spoken many times to Rotary clubs across the country, and I'm always hugely impressed by the range of people who are there, and also the depth of commitment to the public good, and also to a global vision of what Rotary is. Rotary is above all international organization. It brings people together from all around the world. I don't have to tell you this, but it's very important to remember that it's one of the most significant facts about Rotary is its global quality and how it works globally. I thought what I would do just briefly is talk a little bit about where we are right now in the world. um, and the challenges that we're facing as a result of where we are. We're at a difficult moment. Historians and others can make comparisons, but I think it's a moment almost without parallel. I know that when our Prime Minister initially started talking about it, he talked about it as if it was as a war. But actually, it's even more complicated than that, because we're dealing with an enemy, if you like, the pandemic, the disease, the virus, which is invisible. I don't know about you, but I wake up many mornings thinking, like, how could this be? I mean, how can we have been in the state of lockdown and all of the implications of lockdown as it happens? And it seems a little unreal to me. But it is real. It's very real. We've lost a lot of lives around the world. It's a global pandemic that is also a rolling pandemic. You think it's gone and then it comes back. You think it's under control and then it hits you again. We are all dealing with this in a variety of ways. It's having impacts on our economy, on our society. And what I really wanted to emphasize in my talk today is that we need to understand that it's global. We talk about a global pandemic, but a lot of our responses are very local, because what we do as individuals is very local. When we're told what can we do, the answer is stay home. And I get that. We all get that. We've all and put on masks and socially distance. And restrict your activities as much as possible. And one of the impacts that has had is it's created a sense of isolation. And that isolationism, if you like, is not only about us as individuals feeling isolated from one another, feeling disconnected, not seeing our families, not seeing our extended families, not seeing our friends. It's also had an impact on countries, I believe. It's making us more isolated from one another. And invariably, because of the economic impacts and because of how drastic the measures taken to deal with the virus have been, we tend to become a little bit more isolated about ourselves and our own countries. So we think of this as a Canadian pandemic. Now, it's changed. It's just things are, like I say, it's rolling, so it's evolving and it's changing all the time. But for the first 4 or 5 months, we got used to waking up in the morning and having a cup of coffee and then listening to the Prime Minister explain what was going on for that day, and then listening to the Premier, and then, if we're really gluttons for punishment, listening to the President of the United States, although I have to confess, I didn't do that quite as regularly as I, not as I should have, but I certainly didn't do it as regularly as I listened to my own leaders. And every day a new program would be announced. The program would be for CERB, the program would be for businesses, the program would, a whole variety of things, to the point where we've spent an exceptional amount of money on ourselves and on keeping us going, on keeping the economy going, for the very reason that there is no parallel to the economic measures that have been taken to deal with this virus. We've never deliberately shut down our economy before. And where the wartime analogy really breaks down is when we went to war as a country in 1940, most recently 1939, the country started up. The economy was actually not doing well. And the impact of the war was to put everybody to work, join the army, or you went to work in a factory. And we had in the space of 2 or 3 years, we had virtually no unemployment. And we borrowed a lot of money to do it, but we did it. We put people to work, and people felt productive and they felt connected. This is very different. People don't feel as productive and they don't feel as connected. And still we spend a lot of money on ourselves. And globally, what this means is we're not thinking enough about what is the global impact of this pandemic. Oh, and by the way, why should I care? And so when we look now at the evidence, we can see that it started in China and then came to Europe. and then spread through Europe, and then came to the United States and Canada. But now we have to understand it's truly become a global phenomenon. And the measures that have been taken are not exactly the same in every country, precisely because many countries can't afford to do what we've done. The poorest countries in the world can't socially distance because that's not how they function. An informal economy where people are working here and working there is not one that you can easily regulate or manage in that way. And they're also not shutting down because they can't afford to. What we have done is very expensive. Only wealthy countries can afford to do what we've done. But the pandemic has had a very, very dramatic effect on people's health, and it's also having a very dramatic effect on global economies. For example, the poorest countries are getting very, very poor. So we talk about COVID as a great leveler. Well, actually, I don't agree with that. I don't think it is a great leveler. I think COVID is a great revealer. I think in fact, it reveals inequalities in our own society. So we now know that if you're less well off and if you're a person of color in Canada, you are much more likely to have been exposed to COVID than if you're a wealthier person. And that is a reality. And reality for many people is that COVID is not a big part of their lives, but COVID is a huge part of a lot of other people's lives. And we need to understand that. So when I say it's a revealer, it's not only a revealer about ourselves in Canada. So it's revealed real vulnerabilities in our system of healthcare for seniors, for example. It's revealed very strongly that something that people have been talking about for a while, the warehousing of older people as a social policy had real implications. And thinking you could do it on the cheap has had huge implications for the health of senior citizens. Globally, we can say the same thing. The poorest countries are being absolutely devastated. I was talking last week to the head of the Secretariat in the United Nations that coordinates all of the humanitarian agencies in the UN, and there are a lot of them, UNICEF, UNHCR, they all have acronyms. The groups that deal with refugees, the groups that deal with children, the groups that deal with development, and so on. And there's one agency at the UN that coordinates all that work that's happening. And he said, it's not being widely publicized. There are 4 famines going on in the world right now, 4. One in Yemen, one in Somalia, one in South Sudan, and something is starting in Syria again. So when you consider that, not big headlines, you may recall when we had the Ethiopian famine in the 1980s, that was a major issue on every television screen for days on end in Canada, huge movements to do something about it and to respond. We haven't even begun to respond to the extent of the food crisis, which is the next level above a famine. Famine is when people are starving and they can't get access to food because humanitarian workers can't get access to it and because the food supply is challenged everywhere. The next level up is where food supply is challenged, but there are food shortages. And those numbers are everywhere, all through Africa, south of the Sahara, all through the Middle East. We're seeing it, and we're seeing it now. Again, not something that one would have expected. We're seeing it in the Americas. We're seeing it in Haiti. Certainly, we're seeing it in Haiti, and we're also seeing it in Central America, and we're seeing it in the refugee camps that have close to 4 million people from Venezuela in them, on the border with Colombia, on the border with Brazil. So we are looking at an unprecedented economic and social challenge globally, in addition to what we're facing ourselves. So the world is facing this at the same time as we are living in a world without adult supervision. By which I mean not just the personalities of the people who we think of as being our world leaders, but sort of saying, well, where is the leadership coming from on this problem or that problem? And there's no clear leadership that sort of says, yes, we'll do this and we'll do that. There's no, people talk about a Marshall Plan. A Marshall Plan required Marshall. Marshall had to have the force and support of the government of the United States and the Congress and the Senate of the United States to mobilize an unprecedented effort to provide relief for Europe between 1945 and 1955. We don't have that. We have the Secretary General of the UN who has no money. He doesn't run a government. He doesn't print money in the basement. He's not in a position to fund anything. He asks governments to help. I can't imagine how frustrating a job it must be. You see the problems and you can't respond to them. So when we look at these disruptive forces that are at work, and obviously COVID has revealed a lot of these disruptive forces, lack of trust globally, a real retreat from a notion that there are common rules and we have to work by those rules, and the notion of a multilateral system that's functioning really well and that people are prepared to support it, and we have clear rules on trade, and we have clear rules on how international law is supposed to work. Not so much anymore, not so much right now. So this is the challenge. This is the moment at which I find myself going to New York in 2 weeks and attending virtual sessions of the General Assembly, and knowing that one of the great challenges we're going to have globally is, can we get our act together? Can we actually mobilize the resources that are going to be necessary to create the basis for a global recovery? Because not only will we not find a solution to the pandemic unless we do it globally, unless we produce a vaccine that is universally accessible, we're not going to find a deep solution to this in the next 2 years. And so that's a big ticket item. How do we pay for a vaccine? Once we find a vaccine, how do we distribute it? I mean, think about it for a moment. We've got to vaccinate 7 billion people. Like nothing we've ever seen. We've never had to do that in a relatively short space of time. We've had global approaches on vaccination against measles and against polio and against diphtheria and against cholera. Those have had years to build up, and we've had massive systems dealing with it. Now we're dealing with a completely different magnitude. And we've got at work, guess what? Vaccine nationalism. We've all seen it. Countries saying, well, we're going to grab a hold of that for us. We're going to keep this patent here. We're going to keep this, and we'll get to the rest of the world eventually, but they'll have to pay for it. Well, the costs of it are huge. So that's something we have to address. We have to address the displacement and the human cost that we've seen and that we're continuing to see because of increased conflict. And we're going to have to deal with the economic consequences, because it has slowed the whole world down. The whole world has slowed down. Supply chains are, as they say, interrupted, and there isn't the confidence that's allowing the global economy to recover. And Canadians often say to themselves, well, you know, I care about that, but I really, really mostly care about myself and my family, and I mostly care about Canada. And I don't want money going somewhere else. So I have the tough job of convincing Canadians, of helping to convince Canadians with the Prime Minister and others, that this is actually something we have to do. We're not doing it because we like to think we're nice. We're not only doing it because of our sense of solidarity and our sense of love for our fellow human beings. We're also doing it because it's in our self-interest to do it. Clearly, in terms of health, as long as it's the virus is hanging around somewhere, it's got the potential to come back and kill us. If we can find a health solution that is global and is universal, then we've got a chance to do something and to find a solution that will have a longer term impact. But the same is true for the economy. We're a trading country in Canada. We trade with the world per capita far more than most countries. And it's in our interest to create stability and prosperity globally and rules, and clear rules saying you can do this, you can't do that. And we're fighting this fight every day now in terms of what's happening in other countries. And the President of the United States just announced in the middle of his election campaign that he's going to put a 10% tariff on aluminum. That affects our workers. These are moments that are deeply challenging to us as a country. And I guess my final thought that I want to leave with you is it's not about what we say globally. It's about what we do. And I think we're living in an age of communication where people think that, well, if I give the right speech, if I get the right message out there, if I brand myself in a certain way, then that's enough. That's all I need to do. That'll be enough to get by. And I disagree completely with that premise. To me, it's not about what you say is important, but what you do is even more important, and how you do it is even more important. And so we really, really have to get to that in a practical way, and we have to understand as Canadians that there's more to be done. We've spent close to $15 trillion on ourselves, and we're going to have to spend more than we have been. And this will, I think, be an issue for governments in the next few months. We're going to have to do more to allow us to build back better and build back in a major and significant way. And that's something that we're going to have to be prepared to step up, along with a number of other countries, as we look at what the consequences of this are. So I thought I'd leave you with those thoughts. They're not particularly stimulating. When I just finished writing a report for Mr. Trudeau, and it was on this subject about how challenging the COVID was globally and how we had to have a global response to it. He said, "Have you got any good news for me today?" I said, "No, I'm sorry. The only good news is I hope we have the resilience ourselves and the imagination to do what we need to do, because it's going to be a challenge." Happy to take your questions and comments.
Okay, thank you, Bob. The key thing is action. If you have a thought, you want to help, you want to do something, is to take action. And we just want you to know that Rotary is behind you 100%, and our club is behind you 100%. So I'm going to get a few little questions here. I saw one from Carolyn. Okay, so on UN reform, the number of countries that are members of the United Nations has risen from 51 to 185, but the seats available on the UN Security Council has only gone from 11 to 15 since 1965. Would you support increasing the number of seats available to enhance the legitimacy and effectiveness? What other than UN reforms are you interested in?
Well, I think one of the problems, of all the UN, of the arms of the UN, the Security Council is the most problematic. We've got five countries with a permanent veto. And those countries have never been more divided, even during the Cold War. I mean, the Cold War was one thing, but this is a number of countries with a mutual veto, and they will exercise it in different ways at different times. And so I think there's been no leadership out of the Security Council on COVID, none. And I think that's been a real problem, but we still have been able to innovate around it through the General Assembly and through other agencies and other means. Canada's actually started up a process in concert with Jamaica. We said, why don't we set up a group that's going to look at the global impact of COVID. And in May, we got our Prime Minister and the Prime Minister of Jamaica and the Secretary General to pull together 60 heads of state, heads of government to talk about and to deal with the global impact and to address it. And we've been working through that process. Now we created a process that would allow us to keep discussions going with the IMF and the World Bank, and Canada co-chairs that. And so it's a very, very critical process. That's one example. That's not exactly constitutional change, but we all know from our own situation in Canada, constitutional change is difficult and you can get totally caught up in it if you're not careful. So I'm a supporter of UN reform. I think there is a group that's organized, that's looking at it and continues to press for it. But I think it's more a matter of saying the most effective reform I think we can do is simply to increase our own level of commitment and to work with other willing partners who want to do stuff with us on a whole range of subjects. And I think that will be the most effective way to generate what the UN can do. I don't think we can wait around for the five big guys to decide, they're going to engage in a process of reform. Because in order for reform to happen, all 5 of those countries have to agree that they're going to let it happen. And that's, as we know, it's very difficult it's just hard for that to work.
Right. Okay. Here, we'll get Lily's question here. Does Canada have a UN human rights physical office space here? If not, would you be interested in helping me create one based out of Toronto?
We don't have, the UN doesn't have a human rights space here. I mean, in a sense, we have lots of spaces because we have not only our offices in New York and in Geneva, but we also have our headquarters in Ottawa, where there is a human rights division of Global Affairs Canada, which is very involved in human rights and the rule of law. It's a subject of great interest to me. I've spent much of my life working in the field of human rights and Indigenous rights and refugee rights, and I'm very involved with that. I'm not sure I could convince the government of Canada to only set up an office in Toronto. I think we'd have to continue to do it virtually, but we do have a lot of activity going on with people who are interested in the field of human rights, and Lily, there's lots of networks you can join that are pushing ahead on this. There's more going on in that field than you can imagine, and some of it is actually really productive, and it does involve ordinary people from around the world engaging with one another. One of the things about COVID is, yes, it's created isolation, but it's also really allowed people to engage online in unprecedented numbers with each other. And that's been a very positive feature, I think, of our life over the last 5 months.
I want to be careful of time because we do want to give you a formal thank you at the end. But just before Krista thanks you, what can we as Rotarians do, Bob? Actually, it's unfortunate that you do have to leave because we're announcing today that our club just got given a Rotary International Global Grant for $90,000 for sustainability, really, of water projects for the Indigenous community that our Indigenous committee had organized. And there's a lot of people on this call today that are part of that successful grant that's just about to get started. What else can we do as Rotarians to back you?
Well, I think to me, let me just say, I think the work that Rotary has done in Canada on Indigenous issues has been really terrific. The depth of the commitment, the imagination, the time that people have been spending on this, I think it's been outstanding. And I've actually, the last 2 or 3 talks I've given to Rotary have been principally on Indigenous issues because of the level of commitment and the level of interest, frankly, within Rotary on these issues. I think what that experience, I think, should teach us is we often think of the world as being out there, like it's other people out there. Canada's, we're okay, but out there is stuff we got. The answer is no. We actually we're part of the world. The whole Indigenous, non-Indigenous relationship has its parallels in virtually every country in the world. Whether you're talking about the bush people of the Kalahari Desert or the indigenous people in the east of India. You know, you look at relations between many groups in Southeast Asia and China, throughout Latin America, obviously, throughout Africa. As I said, the issue of indigeneity is caught up in our history. It's what connects us to the whole historical process of colonization and settlement and its consequences. So that's not, so you say, well, is that part of our global commitment or is that part of our national commitment? It's both. We're part of this process. And I think the actions that Rotary takes and the way that Rotary is committed to doing stuff and not just talking about stuff is a huge example for Canadians. And the power of example is way more powerful than we think, which is one of the reasons why, I'll make no bones about it, I'm pleading with my own government to say we're going to do more and to do more, and to say we're willing to do more and we're willing to engage further, because that will be the most powerful message we can deliver. Not that we're having a meeting or having a conference, but that we're actually stepping up and doing something, and doing it in a way that is sustainable. Because I think the climate crisis and COVID in a way go together, because it allows us to grow back better. If we take full advantage of this crisis, we will in fact be able to grow back better and more sustainably than we were when we went into the crisis.
Yes. Thank you very much. Krista, I'll have you come up to thank Bob.
Bob, thank you very much. While you were standing on the tarmac with Arlene back in the early 90s, I was a fresh-eyed grad as a speechwriter at Queen's Park. And since then, I've had several opportunities to see you present, and you always begin with a joke, and not just any joke, but a good joke that creates comfort and connection with your audience. So I want to say thank you for being here today, and you being here today is part of that gift of COVID, where we are able to engage and come together and have you speak to us, because we're stuck behind a computer screen, but we're also gifted with this kind of connection. I do think that you are a great revealer of inequality, and I am so thrilled that you are representing the world, and I wish you, and all of us wish you, much success and peace in that role, and your ability to attract the next generation. And Lil, I'm speaking to you, just sort of attest to the fact that you are now the person in our wild dreams, and you can go back to Arlene and tell her that you are creating this excitement in the next generation, and I have been part of growing up with you. So I want to personally say thank you, and I want to extend my thanks on behalf of our club. And in that thanking, it's not lost on me that we are in your name inoculating 100 kids. And as we slow but steady inoculate against one disease, this number of 7 billion does linger. And so it speaks to, I think, all of us, how challenging the logistics of that specific challenge is going to be. But I'm so glad that you will be representing Canada on the stage. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a great opportunity. And I must confess, I had no idea that I was in anybody's dreams. And I also had no idea I had that many fans in Guelph. So I'm really appreciative of all this.
You'll
Thank
have
you
to
so
come
much.
back again soon then.
In person next time.
That'd be great.
We're going to take you up on it, Bob.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Take
Bob.
Take care.
Stay connected with Bob, Lil.
I just sent him my email.
Uh-oh.
Okay, everybody.